Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I'm going to be giving you my review for both the play, short story and the 2016 miniseries adaptation of Witness for the Prosecution by Agatha Christie. Now the reason why I wanted to do a review of this particular story is because, well, I wanted to do something literature related or book related for the longest time. But I kind of found myself going, oh, in the new year I'll be doing a little bit more of that. And I also wanted to do it because during Christmas time I like to watch all sorts of different things. I like to watch a lot of holiday based films like your Home Alones, your Gremlins, your It's Wonderful Lives, or even, the likes of the classic Christmas specials like the Only Fools and Horses Christmas special over here, as well as one of the greatest of all time. And I also like to watch, those sorts of things, and of course films like Elf and Eyes Wide Shut, or even Krampus or Gremlins. But I also like to watch during Christmas time ghost stories, and I also like to watch murder mysteries. And they just seem like the right type of genre to watch around this time of year. And the reason why I chose Witness for the Prosecution is because it's one of those stories where it really does tell you it really does show you a different side to Agatha Christie's writing that a lot of people might be familiar with. And if you don't know who Agatha Christie is, she's a very well-known novelist, short story writer and playwright who has written many stories like Murder on the Orient Express and Then There Were None, just to name a few. But she has written many great detective stories, most of them under the umbrella of characters like Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple. But what's really great about her stories is she can do all sorts of different things with her writing. She can be very funny in a lot of her books, but she can also be very, very insightful about the psychology of her characters. But she can also be quite dark, and she can often show a very dark side of humanity in a lot of her stories. And one of my favourite ones is Witness for the Prosecution, because it's one of these stories where not only does it show the dark heart of humanity and what really kind of exists in the hearts of man in a lot of her stories, but it also manages to do something quite remarkable, which is it manages to also showcase that there isn't a real cosy vibe to this story. I mean, in the Sarah Phelps miniseries adaptation, the world of Witness for the Prosecution is a very dirty and very grimy place, almost akin to something like David Fincher's Seven. But what's really great about this story is it's a story that follows a working class man who is trying to make ends meet, who is suddenly found guilty or convicted or sent before a trial for the crime of murder, and a man called Jonathan Mayhew is trying to prove his innocence. And who the main character is involved in this trial is a man called Leonard Vole, who is a man who's working as a waiter, but then he ends up running into a very upper class socialite former actress by the name of Emily French. And when he actually gets invited back to her apartment, he is requested to do all sorts of different favours for her. And what this basically means is he essentially has to do stuff for her, even if it does seem degrading to him. So he basically is her prostitute, essentially. She asks him to do very degrading things, and he has to do it with the exception of being paid at the very end of it. And he's doing this because he's very much struggling for money, but he isn't shy when he gets arrested about showing how degrading it is. But he's doing this not just because he wants to, provide for his fiancée and himself, Christine, or Remain, depending on what version of the story you're reading or what version of the story you see. But he's also doing it because he wants to get married to Remain, and he wants to, provide a life for her and go on a lovely honeymoon. So he wants to do all this stuff, even if it is quite degrading and quite unclean. So when Emily French is found murdered, Leonard Vole is arrested, and Jonathan Mayhew is assigned to the case to prove his innocence. And what this story basically becomes, and I'm going to be focusing on the miniseries adaptation for most of my critiques, and this stars Toby Jones, who is mostly well known for playing the bad guy in two very big blockbuster movies. He was the henchman villain at the head of Hydra in Captain America: The First Avenger, and he was also one of the villains in Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. But he was also the guy who played Ollie in Frank Darabont's adaptation of Stephen King's The Mist, and I actually kind of find that very interesting. But he plays a character who is quite interesting to me, because Jonathan Mayhew in the 2016 adaptation is a guy who's quite ordinary. He's an ordinary witness for the prosecution. He's just a guy who basically is trying to make ends meet, and he is living on his own with his wife. And you can tell that there is some friction between them from their previous marriage, but you never really find out why that is until much later in the story. And we'll get to that later, but what's very interesting about both the short story and the play version is they're two completely different stories, or they have two completely different outcomes that are most noteworthy, because this particular adaptation decides to follow the rules of the original short story, which Agatha Christie pretty much said she wasn't very happy with when she first wrote it. She basically wrote, and spoiler alert for the entirety of Witness for the Prosecution, so if you haven't seen the play, or if you haven't read the play, or if you haven't read the original short story or seen the adaptation, please click off now and come back when you've seen it or read it or whatever, because I will be going to spoilers. But what basically happens in the story, because the essential layout of the entire story is it's meant to be kind of like a morality story where you're trying to figure out, is he innocent or is he guilty of this murder? And if he is innocent, who did kill Emily French? And there's an entire web of suspects that start to develop as the story goes on, but it's more or less, that doesn't become the focus. What becomes the focus is whether or not Leonard Vole is innocent, and if he is innocent, then who killed Emily French. But what's very interesting is that I did find myself really engaged in the story, in the characters, and I did find myself thinking, this is actually a much more grounded and down-to-earth story than a lot of other Agatha Christie adaptations, at least on the surface level, because this entire story really does show the dark heart of humanity. It shows the dark heart of what people are willing to do to succeed. You could pretty much replace the story of Leonard Vole and substitute it for the trial of O.J. Simpson, a real-life murder case where a man is often presumed innocent, but it's later revealed and often speculated whether or not he was guilty. But what's very interesting about this particular scenario is there wasn't a media circus surrounding it. But what I really like about this story, and what the play kind of highlights, and both versions of the story kind of highlight and participate in, is the idea that the idea of a trial is kind of like a theatre piece where you kind of feel like you're engaging in a much more broad and theatrical production, but in reality you're basically just seeing someone's life get torn to pieces. And in the Sarah Phelps written and Toby Jones starring 2016 miniseries adaptation, they do a very clever thing where she parallels the courtroom scenes with the scenes of the theatre and this big lavish theatre production that Romaine, aka Christine from the original play and short story, is involved in. And it's actually kind of interesting because it really does show that regardless of whether you're watching a theatre piece or whether you're watching a trial, people do see it as often one and the same, where you do often find yourself excited by the mere prospect that you're getting up close and personal with a criminal, and there's something really kind of almost seductive and very glamorous about the whole process, even though technically it is still quite dark and really kind of unsettling and really kind of degrading, because you really do see Leonard Vole kind of go from being this very desperate man who already is struggling to make ends meet to being a guy who is almost reduced to this very animalistic and very primal sense of just genuine evil, just a genuine sense of desperation and like, oh, I have to prove that I'm innocent, and whether or not you believe me, I know in my heart that I'm innocent. And that's something that I really do think is quite sad and tragic about this story, because he knows he's innocent, but we don't know. And the only way we can find out is if we hear, like in a jury, we have to hear both sides of the story. We have to hear who is against him, but then we have to hear who's for him as well. So there's all this different stuff going on. But I really do like the 2016 adaptation because it is really, really dark. It really does have a lot of very dark scenes in it. And not only that, but it really does sort of embrace this very kind of gothic and very foggy atmosphere where these characters are literally walking through very foggy streets, and characters are literally like wielding a cigarette while a guy's, pissing up against a wall and things like that. Like really kind of very dark, very grisly, almost Jack the Ripper 1888 kind of surroundings, like very kind of dark, very kind of sinister, but there's almost this glamorousness to it as well, and it's really kind of bizarre in how it's depicted. But it's actually a very intelligently written piece, both the original story and, of course, Sarah Phelps's adaptation. But what I really like about this adaptation is she kind of highlights something that even the short story didn't even talk about, which is the idea that Jonathan Mayhew is just as much a sinister character as any of these other characters in the story, because what he essentially does is he's trying to figure out who potentially could have killed Emily French. But in doing so, and by the way, I just want to let you know, there are massive spoilers for this story going in. So if you haven't read the original source material, read the play, or read the short story, or seen the 2016 adaptation, or any of the other adaptations of this story, please click off now and come back when you've read or seen any of the adaptations, because they're amazing. If you want to see the 2016 miniseries adaptation, it's currently on iPlayer and BBC iPlayer. And there's hundreds of other adaptations of Witness for the Prosecution, but I really do like this version because it's quite dark and it's quite sinister. And Sarah Phelps really understands Agatha Christie's writing in a way that no other screenwriter does, I feel, because she really is one of those writers who understands not only the theatre, but she understands, just the outline of a lot of Agatha Christie stories. And of course, a lot of Agatha Christie adaptations are written by her. And of course, Sarah Phelps was a playwright, so this feels like the type of story that's almost tailor-made for someone like her. And she's also done other adaptations of books that I really do like Great Expectations in 2011, and there's various others. She also did the adaptation for J.K. Rowling's The Casual Vacancy as well. So there's all these other different adaptations that she has under her belt, including an adaptation of one of my favourite Agatha Christie novels that doesn't involve Poirot or Miss Marple, and that is And Then There Were None. And I want to do a review of that one someday, so let me know in the comments whether you think it's actually worth doing, because I'd like to talk more about Agatha Christie stories and more murder mysteries in general, because they're all amazing. But yes, this story, the original short story, going into spoilers now, has a much more definitive conclusion as to what actually happened to Emily French, who killed her, and how it was done, and what the motivation was. But the original play has a much more ambiguous ending, because Leonard Vole kind of dies off stage, where he doesn't really get the chance to defend himself, nor does he get a chance to walk away a free man. He gets subjected to the brutality of the law system, but in doing so he ends up losing his life. And that's the tragedy of the original play, is that this guy kind of goes to his grave not really pleading his case, whether he is guilty or innocent, and it is left up in the air, whereas in the short story it's much more definitive. And I'm not going to say what the definitive answer is, but it really is quite fascinating. And the 2016 version goes for the original short story approach, and not only that, but she also manages to add in a new detail that actually makes it quite interesting, in the sense that Jonathan Mayhew is just as guilty of any crime as Leonard Vole is, because honestly, this guy, even though he might seem like a guy who's trying to work hard to provide for his wife after they've essentially lost a son, you really do get the impression that there is something kind of almost sneaky and very snidey about him, because even though he does kind of depict himself as kind of like a very quiet and very kind of, respectful and very nice guy, he does have some dark secrets. And one of the secrets is that when the First World War was up and running, he actually had enlisted both himself and his son, who was quite young at the time. I think he was around 14 and 15, and they both went to war, and only one of them came back. And his wife has been very angry at Jonathan as a result of that. And the 2016 adaptation is the best adaptation as far as I'm concerned, because this adaptation goes hard in the dramatic area, because I do feel like a lot of the stuff that's in this particular adaptation is really dark, and it really does show that humanity is quite a very dark world. it does really kind of show humanity in this very dark world in that adaptation, and it really does show that yes, even the good guys do have moments where it's like, yeah, there's something not very trustworthy about you. And I really do love Toby Jones's performance, because even though he does have some dark secrets, you really do get the impression that he is still a good man who's trying to do the right thing. And maybe he's trying to save Leonard Vole because he maybe let his son die, and he's felt guilty for that ever since. And he's almost trying to repent for his sins almost, and trying to redeem himself in some way. But in reality, it turns out that it's all for naught, because it turns out that Leonard Vole actually did kill the mistress. But not only that, but quite stupidly, well, I suppose quite intelligently, Jonathan Mayhew decides to blame the entire murder plan on the housemaid of Emily French, whose name is Janet, and she has a nervous breakdown after the murder, and she accuses Leonard Vole point blank of being sort of like the culprit in the murder, only to discover that when he basically pulls up a case against her, he basically does it on the off chance that she killed Emily French's cat Mimi, and she basically kills the cat, and that's basically his basis for arresting her and accusing her of the crime. And it's very interesting because he kind of almost depicts her as almost like a deranged lesbian. And even though I don't like this particular move that Jonathan Mayhew does, because he basically is demonising a gay woman, or a potentially gay woman, for the crime of murder because it just happens to be circumstantial, but I also really kind of hate that fact that he's almost like demonising her because of her sexuality. And it also shows that kind of dark side that Jonathan Mayhew has. But also at the same time, it turns out that he's actually convicted an innocent woman, and he's convicted her to hang. And that's quite important, because Jonathan Mayhew doesn't go with what Leonard Vole, as a free man, wanted to do, which is he basically gave her enough money. He said, I'm going to give her enough money to get a place of her own and to get, a new job and things like that. Jonathan Mayhew just goes, no, she deserves to hang for her crimes, which she didn't even end up committing in the end. Yes, she killed the cat, but in many ways it was just because she snapped and she lost her mind, because she really loved Emily French, and she loved this woman who was a very big part of her life. Yes, she was frustrating. She did love her in the same way that a maid would love her mistress and really care for her mistress, almost like family. So it is even more heartbreaking that an innocent woman got accused of the murder and eventually hung. And that's the beauty of Agatha Christie's stories, is you do kind of find yourself thinking, this is the dark side of human nature, and I think she understands that. She understood that more than anybody else. And it's a really incredible adaptation. If you can find this adaptation, it's on BBC iPlayer, and it's the 2016 adaptation starring Toby Jones. And it's a really good adaptation. It's probably one of her more darker stories, but I really do love it. It's one of my favourites. It's one of those ones where I feel like this is a really good adaptation. I want to see other adaptations of Witness of the Prosecution, to see how they do the story and how they tell the story in other decades or whatever. But to me, I just feel like this version reigns supreme, because Sarah Phelps's adaptation skills are second to none as far as I'm concerned. Like, she really is a fantastic adapter of literary stories, and she's done various other adaptations of Agatha Christie stories, including And Then There Were None, which is another favourite Agatha Christie story of mine. And she's also done adaptations of the ABC Murders, which is a Poirot story, but she's also done The Pale Horse as well. She's also done Ordeal by Innocence, which is another good adaptation starring Bill Nighy. Her catalogue for Agatha Christie adaptations is vast, and I think if you get the chance to see any adaptations of an Agatha Christie story, especially when it's for the prosecution, please check out the 2016 version. It's amazing, and it definitely is a great gateway story into the works of Agatha Christie. And I hope you guys like this video. Sorry I rambled on a bit for this particular review, but I hope you're having a happy and very safe new year. And let me know what you thought of this particular story down in the comments. Which one do you like best? Is there any other adaptations of When It's for the Prosecution that I probably could have drawn light on? And let me know if you want me to review any more Agatha Christie works in the future. I hope you're all doing very well. This has been Josh with WHIMS. And if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos, please subscribe for more. I hope you all have a very good day. Take care. Bye-bye for now.